There we go. We are live.
We
Okay,
are
so
live.
this is called Including Ethnicity and Gender in Children's Books. And before we get going on that, I just want to remind everybody that my last video was Draw 50 Things. And I am so excited about how many sketches I'm seeing coming in uh, on Instagram and on Facebook. And if I don't directly talk to you, I love what you guys are doing. So I just want to throw that out there. I'll link that video below as well. Okay, so Tyrus, you and I are both children's book illustrators,
Allegedly.
allegedly. Are we stupid for making this video? I got a whole list of questions here, and that's actually one of the first ones I wrote down.
Well, first of all, it's good to be back. I want to say hi to all the Wiltarians out there. Is that what do you guys? What do you call your followers? What do you call them?
You know what? There's just a lot of cool people that are on the internet that somehow happen to find my videos every now and then.
I like the term Wiltarians. I like that. It sounds like extraterrestrial. Like I'm a Wiltarian. Are you? I mean, I think we just started a movement, people. Huh? Yeah. Okay. Good. Everybody agreed.
Yeah, and you know what? I'll put a link to our other. What did we talk about last time?
Life, children, ladies,
all sorts of things. Yeah. So I'll link that video as well. But the reason that I love talking to you is because one, you're good at talking. Two, you've thought about a lot of things. You're interesting. You've done a lot of things in your life, and there are a lot of people. My second question was, why don't we have a more diverse panel? And pretty much the reason that we came up with was that it's hard to have a conversation when you have more than two people sometimes, because some people don't want to interrupt or don't feel like, they want to. I don't know. I just feel like it's easier. So we're going to screw this up, but at least we're going to have fun doing it, right?
Well, first of all, we're not going to screw it up, right? You're a professional. I'm a professional, and this will be professional. But no, you're right. When you have more than two people, oftentimes thought gets interrupted more frequently, right? So you may have an idea and you're waiting for somebody else to finish, and they say something that's so impactful that it throws you completely off the train track. And so voila.
You don't go down that road that you really wanted to go down.
There you go.
Yeah.
So at least with me, you can tell me to shut up, and I respect you enough to do it, and then you can keep going. Yeah.
Okay. So I've got a list of questions here, and we'll just see where this thing takes us. Maybe one question I didn't write down was why are we doing this?
Well, I think it's for artists and for book illustrators, or whatever term you would want to call it. I think there's a bit of a changing of the guard in design, and it requires that we are more inclusive of people who may not look like us or may not look like what the norm is. So let me throw a couple of stats, random stats I have in my head. And in 1972, they did a study, and I think 5% of the books had African-American lead characters in it, or African-American or minority representation. Let me say minority representation. 5% African-American, 9% altogether with minorities. In 2005, they did the same survey, and the number hadn't changed, right? So that's a long time.
What were the dates again? The first one?
I want to say 1972 and then 2005,
okay.
Right? So there was a long period where we didn't have any growth, any in diversity or the change of guard as far as what characters look like in books. But we did in cartoons, we do in television series. I mean, think about this. You had the Cosby Show. You had, all of these other things that changed the rest of the world, but the books lagged behind. And in 2006, all of a sudden, it became prevalent. It became an issue, and people were saying, wait a minute, we need more diversity in kids' books. And so, you've had the phone calls. I get the phone calls. Matter of fact, most of my clients, that's what they're looking for. They want full representation in books. And so we just decided, man, let's talk about this. Let's get other artists aware and prepared. Even if you're a student, you go in with the idea of, okay, so characters don't actually have to look like me. And you can be successful if you can draw more than things that look like you or represent you, et cetera, et cetera. So we're just trying to prep people, get them up to speed, and have this conversation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, it's always been an issue of knowing how to do it, how to feel comfortable doing it, knowing how to be inclusive but not overly inclusive. Maybe I would say. So I guess there's a ton of reasons for doing this, but I think that at least for myself, my portfolio still isn't very diverse in ethnicities for sure. I've tried to include more, and I'm trying to include more, but I think as we go through some of this discussion, maybe that'll reveal the whys and things like that. And by the way, for anybody who's watching this, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section, as sometimes the more interesting parts of a video actually take place in the comment section. So feel free, and we'll stop back there and maybe even get involved in the conversation there after the video. So, okay, um, do you have children's books with various ethnicities and genders in them?
So I started off with Disney, and so of course that's primarily Caucasian, white. If I say white, I mean Caucasian. So,
Yeah.
um,
By the way, what color is your skin to to give you a really? Have you ever gone and like tried to mix up the color?
RGB, huh? You want to know what the RGB is? Is that what you're asking me?
How about
CMYK?
an
No,
awkward? I think my skin color, it was kind of like an off
pink.
white, kind of a tannish. If I put a little burnt sienna and a little yellow ochre
You're
in
giving
there.
yourself too much credit with the tannish. You haven't seen the sun since '87, bro. You're out in the mountains, hanging out in the snow. Let's not. Yeah, okay. No, us. My skin color is like brownish red, right? So I can give you the RGB if you like. I got Photoshop open right over here. But so back to the question.
Yeah.
And so lately, I've been doing a lot of independent books, which happen to have primarily, mostly either Spanish, Mexican, Hispanic, Black, no Asian characters, but primarily what you would consider minorities. So that's been the books that I worked on, the groups of characters that I normally develop and design.
Mm-hmm.
But keep in mind, I only have almost 3.5 years of industry experience for books,
Right.
including Disney, 4 or 5 including Disney. But I have about 15 years of design for cartoons, toys, video games.
Right.
So
And in the commercial space, there's even, it seems like there's even less of an attempt often to, for at least for my experience, when I was doing a lot of advertising work, I was never asked to include different ethnicities in my work. And I don't know, because you worked in games too, right? So
yeah, yeah.
did you get asked to do that in games?
So initially, no, right? But you can see now. So I was in advertising for quite a while too, and even in toy design, that wasn't really a subject that mattered as much.
Mm-hmm.
But it's changed. I want to say in the last 5 to 10 years, especially in video games, you can see it, and in cartoons, you can see it. But in video games, they'll often give you the choice of having a lead female or male character.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you're playing in Call of Duty, and personally, as a former Marine, I think it's completely unrealistic, but I get the point. They are trying to include another 50% of potential buyers and not
Right.
turn them off. So if I'm playing a video game, Call of Duty, for example, and my sister walked by and she sees there's a lead girl or strong character, she might want to play it because now she feels there's skin in the game for her.
Right.
And that's the goal. And so marketers are trying to make more money. And so, in the past, that's not something you would have talked about in design, but now it is. Now it's, hey, make sure that you're inclusive. Make sure that you're adding a counterpart that's a girl character or lead that's a female character.
Mm-hmm.
When I say girl, I'm speaking my vernacular, so I'm just going to say girl. I mean woman. I mean whatever won't offend people. So to answer that question, yeah, I think it's changed. I think now that's required a lot more.
For me, I have never been asked to do a book with different ethnicities. I have been asked to do quite a few sections of textbooks for children, like a reading book or a math book, and then they'll specify, we want African American, Asian, Indian. Caucasian, and they'll kind of often they'll specify the numbers of people to include in there. I have been mostly asked to illustrate books with animals, and the thing that I've always loved, and I've kind of hid behind actually, and whenever someone's asked me this question about race, I've always kind of said, well, I do animal books. And the cool thing about animals is there are no genders, there are no races to deal with. And I don't mean to deal with in a negative sense, but the pressure's off, because you can have different animals doing different things, and if you have an animal doing something menial, or an animal doing being the bad guy, no one can say, well, why'd you do that to hyenas, or why why'd you make the penguin the stupid guy,
Yeah.
so that's what I've been asked to do in my last book that hasn't excuse me hasn't come out yet. It's called Bonaparte, and for Random House, and that one is dealing with a Frankenstein character, a skeleton character, and it's got basically all the Halloween characters. So the two main characters are, and then there's a pumpkin, but again, no real genders. The only gender really that's really put in there, I guess, Frankenstein is a guy, and the witch character is a female, but it doesn't. There was no pressure, and those archetypes were already established. Everybody knows
Long
who
time
they
ago.
are.
Yeah.
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 And so I didn't have to think about it all. But let me ask you this. This is another question.
Before you get to the next question,
Yeah.
let me make a point about what you said. So essentially, we're talking about books are holding on to the old guard. They're not very advanced. They tend to tell the same stories over and over again. For example, you can actually make a Little Red Riding Hood, and I have the latest one here somewhere. I think it's by Dan Santat. Santat. And you can sell it again. You don't have to change the story. You don't have to change the genders. You could just, give it your own style. Same with Frankenstein or Three Little Pigs. Those traditional stories, you could just repeat them. They don't force you out of a comfort zone, and no one challenges you, because we all grew up hearing those stories. So I think that allows the book industry to stay behind.
Yeah.
Where every other industry is moving forward. Let me give you an example of industries moving forward. So you and I are old enough to know that the Super Bowl, and we're wise enough to know that the Super Bowl is for men. It's football. Primarily men watch football. We're not talking about the small exceptions. We're talking about the norm. But now if you watch the Super Bowl and you watch the halftime show, that's not geared toward men at all anymore. Right? So the new world is, well, wait a minute. Even though primarily men want to watch football, their wives, their girlfriends, their daughters, their sisters tend to watch this game too. So let's mix up our advertising and let's give it to them. Now, as a man, it's annoying if you don't understand what's happening. You're like, what is this about? Well, why is this commercial that way? What are they talking about? But if you say, oh, this isn't for me, this is for someone else. So you can see the fast forward or the forward thinking of the NFL or CBS or whoever has the Super Bowl. In books, you're not forced to do that. In books, you can get away with doing what you've been doing for 50 years, 60 years. There isn't much advanced thinking or techniques or styles in books. So I think that's why we don't see that change, or that's why you aren't being asked as of now to do that. But let me give you another stat that changes. A forward-thinking person goes, wow, I might have to change what I'm doing or what I'm going to do. Within the next 20 years, 50%. So anyone born, anyone who's 5 years old, how do I say this stat? Okay, let's put it this way. In the next 20 years, the country will be 50% minority, or 60%, 55% minority, and 45 or 50% Caucasian, traditional white, European, whatever you want to call it. That's a big difference than what's happened in the last 30 years, right? Because of immigration, because of whatever the reason is. So then that means your audience changes, right? Who's going to be buying the books is going to change. If you aren't aware of that, you're behind the guard. If as an artist, you're not preparing for that, you're in trouble, because eventually, if you plan on doing this for a while, whether it's video games, whether it's books, anything with design, this is going to be a conversation. And the audience, just like women watching a Super Bowl, it's going to change. There's no way to get around it. So just based on the stats of growth in this country alone, You and I are going to be required to do something we may not have done 5 years ago, definitely like 10 years ago, definitely like 20 years ago. Just to answer what you said.
I might add to that and say that when markets change, often the bigger the company, the slower they are to change. So, and I think that's what you're already saying.
Yeah.
But to add to that, I think that allows and opens up for smaller publishers that can juke and jive and move quicker to find those niche markets. It also allows the individual to go, the self-published author and artist, to find and exploit some of those markets as well. And I think that's really interesting, though, is that the bigger the company, the safer they'll play it. And there's tons of examples of that. And to go out of the gender realm for just a second, as an example, I mean, Kodak invented the first digital camera. And do you know that story?
Oh yeah, tell it. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, so Kodak basically paid a guy to see if he could invent a digital camera because they knew that everything was going digital. And I think this was back in the early 80s, somewhere in there.
I thought it was the late 80s, but I think you keep going.
Might be late 80s.
Right. Yeah.
And he invented one that, and you can look this up on Google, just type in, you can get a better understanding of the story, but it is a great lesson in marketing and big companies and how they function. But the short of the story is basically that he invented this digital camera. It worked. It was horrible. And they said, okay, we're going to just pay you to see if you can make it better. And because it was huge, it filled up a whole cart. And it obviously wasn't fit for sale. And he spent the next, I believe, about 10 years developing it to where he could actually hold it in his hands, but or it was still huge, and the picture wasn't anywhere near as good as film. And he went into the meeting and showed them, and they said, how long will it take for our competitors to make something like this and produce it and get it to where it can compete with film? And he estimated 10 to 15 years or something like that, 20 years, something like that. And all the CEOs of the of Kodak were in their 60s and 70s, and so they just kind of laughed and said, okay, keep working. And they didn't make any changes because I think they knew they were all, the implication was that they knew they weren't going to be around.
Yeah, it didn't matter to them. That's right.
It didn't matter. And where's Kodak today? And so, I'm not sending a warning shot to the big publishers. They know more about the market than I do, but in general, big corporations move very slowly because they have tons of checks and balances. They like to stick with what works. They love to hit home runs, and so they go after those big market shares. But there's lots of smaller markets that are possible to go after that they don't really care about.
Right.
And that's one thing that you could take away from this whole talk that we're going to have, I think, is that basically, if you're not seeing it in children's books, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's not a market for it.
Yeah, that you're right. And I mean, I make a living in those hidden markets, the smaller markets that are growing, independent, who are looking to push an idea, who are looking to tell a story that hasn't been told. The difference between Disney and Pixar and DreamWorks is Pixar, those guys are looking to tell new stories. And look what happened. They cracked the world open. You think about the one with the old man and the balloons. I can't think of the name of it right now.
Was it
Up? I mean, that's a new story, and it's beautiful. Now, maybe it's retold. Maybe it's someone said, "Oh, that was written in 1939." I don't know. So don't kill me in the comment section. What I'm saying is, I didn't read that book in kindergarten or first grade or second grade. No one's ever read it to me. I never heard that story like I did the Three Little Pigs or the Three Little Bears or Cinderella or fill the blank, right? Up was amazing, and it was new, and it was a cool way of telling a story, and it was refreshing. And so think about Big Hero 6. Wow. It's like, hey, it's the same group. It's made for the same type of kid, except it's actually awesome. And so when I go to the movies now, with my kids, I'm just as excited to see the movies as they are. Now think about that. And that's because those guys are telling new stories. They're telling new stories in a cool way. I mean, you can go from there to Marvel, to DC, how they're telling old superhero stories in a new way. And guess what? People are giving their money, they're spending their money. And so eventually books are going to follow, and they're already starting. I talk about Dan, his style and the way that he does books is new and really cool, and a lot of other people. I just use him because I was just
it's
looking
so
at his work.
exciting. I remember seeing the first book. It was the Elvis Chicken thing. I can't remember the title of it, but man,
Was it the Ninja Chicken book?
I don't think it is. I don't think it. No, he has another ninja one, but it was before that. He's gonna kill me.
I'm like,
Sorry, Dan.
I'm looking at my Dan pile. But can I show his book? Can I show his book?
Yeah, absolutely.
He's the guy who did this book, guys. If you don't know about him,
Caldecott.
Yeah. Grab his stuff. This guy's awesome. I love his style, and all of his books are really interesting. So anytime he writes a book, I don't know him. Like I'm not Will Terry, so I don't know him.
I've only met him once. But does he need our help? I mean, he won the Caldecott.
No, he doesn't need our help. I'm just saying, just talking about a forward-thinking artist who creates like something new. He's telling new stories.
I was a fan the moment I first saw his work. I was like, where did this guy come from? Yeah, it's amazing. He comes from animation. He did the Replacements.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so next question. Did you have children's books growing up, and did they have different ethnicities in them? You know what? Before you answer that, let me throw something in that I want to make sure we get in here.
Do it.
That goes with market, because we talked about the market, and I just want to make sure it goes in there. But the publisher Lee and Low,
mm-hmm.
they specialize in doing ethnic books. So when we're talking about and you can look them up. I think they're Lee and Low. What's their?
I'll grab it. I'll keep talking. I'll find it.
I'll put that in the chat too. leeandlow.com. They specialize in ethnic books, so they've already found a niche market in producing books that highlight different ethnicities. Okay, sorry about that. So go ahead and.
I don't know. You were talking. I didn't have anything.
So I was going to say, what kind of books did you grow up with? Did you have? Did they have Caucasian kids in them? Did they have black kids in them? Did they have mixtures? What did you grow up with?
Yeah. So I grew up, and I didn't see very many books with black kids in it, or Hispanic kids, or Asian kids. And I happen to be partial to Asian kids because I love kung fu movies. This is one kid. Side story. This is one kid. So I grew up in Chicago, and I went to this private school, and so I didn't even know. Like we didn't. This is like the reverse of what white people go through. I didn't know any white people. I didn't see any white people. There were no white teachers, no white janitors. Everybody was black, right? So I go to this really expensive private school, and one day this Chinese guy shows up, and his name was Eddie. And Eddie was awesome, and Eddie was Chinese, so I decided right away to make him my best friend. So Eddie and I were friends, and we would draw all the time. So there wasn't much diversity. I couldn't find books with Chinese kids in it. I couldn't find books with black kids in it. I couldn't find every book. Pretty much had like a white kid with pink cheeks, and pretty much the same drawing style. And then
how did that make you feel? I mean, that's such a generic question, but I mean,
sure,
that gets to the heart of it, right? I mean, like,
so for me, when I was younger, it didn't matter as much because I didn't see white people except on TV. It's like, if I went to the store, I didn't see white people. It depends on how far we went. So it was like, all right, this is different. It's a book. But as you get older, and then you realize like, oh, so the world isn't black, and the world is mostly, my country is mostly white. It kind of like, okay, so I'm a very small group. Okay, so like as you get older, you start to, all right, well, a lot of people look like me, but they're just here. Okay, and so as you grow up, as you start to understand, it sucks. It's like, wow, okay. So then you get a couple of cartoons. You get like Fat Albert. That's cool. But you don't get any hero cartoons, right? You don't get any like uber masculine superheroes with a flaming sword like Thundar the Barbarian, one of my favorite cartoons. Or if you're watching Voltron, all of the lions, there's no black lion leaders. You get one. And even I'm talking about outside of book, just in general, to give people an understanding. So you watch Power Rangers, you get the one black guy. He's never the leader, and he's always like a C character. I wouldn't even say a B character. He's not the greatest fighter. He's just a part. And so after a while, you realize, like, man, this is on purpose. This is not an accident. Like, somehow, some ways, for some reason, we
They're
can't be
not
seen.
picking the black guy.
They're not picking the black guy. That's right.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have a resentment toward that. Like, man, you know, what's up with that? Or you hear this term, the term tall, dark, and handsome. I'm like, yeah, that's gonna be me, right? No, they didn't mean that dark. They meant like a little bit of a tan, you know. But listen, I joke about that, but that's real. That's literal. You go, oh, you didn't mean dark like me. So, you know, I'm 6 feet, very muscular. You know, boom, you see the guns, right? So by default, I should be the man, you know, but it's that's not what it meant.
Right.
So you go back to the books, you go back to the cartoons, you go back to the movies, and you know, it sucks. It's unfair. You feel like I'm being excluded. No one looks like me, and you know, it turns kids off. You don't. You're in school, like you talked about the school books. Well, in every school book, every character is white except for the one character. Now, let me give you another side note story. So I went to this private school, and this private school had these religious books, you know, and all of the characters in the book were white, right? Except for the one character who was always in trouble or asking the dumb questions.
Oh, man.
So, so you know, this is the representation of minorities in these books. And after a while, you know, either you resent it or you believe it.
Right.
Now, I happen to have, you know, good home bringing, or whatever, upcoming, or whatever you call it, upbringing. That's what it is. Yeah. And so my parents taught me so much about the world and about color and about, you know, civil rights and things. So it affected me in a different way. But to a kid who doesn't have strong parents or parents aren't home, they have to figure this out on their own. And how do you stop when you see all of this, all of the messages saying that you're less than or you're not important? Imagine the kids who never learn that they are important. So when you hear about the violence and you hear about the disconnect from society, and you go, why would people choose to live like that? What they're doing is checking out of a world that doesn't want them. And they'd rather be in a world that accepts them and allows them to work in between. Now, that's a long answer to a short question, but I'm trying to give a little more insight.
No, I love it. I think, I mean, I have a small parallel to that, and that is, as someone who didn't do well in school, I didn't feel wanted by the school system, but I can't really imagine what it would feel like to not be wanted because of my skin color. You know, and that is, I mean, I can't imagine it. It's got to be horrible.
Let me give you a way to imagine it. All right, this will be good for you. Imagine tomorrow morning you get up and you put on your little short shorts, you know, from the 80s, right? The Larry Birds. And you go to the gym and everybody in the gym is black and all the guys playing is black. And you have to stay there all day, every day for the next 7 years. You know how out of place you would feel? Well, that's what it feels like when society is always saying, because you don't fit into our mold, we're going to reject you.
Yeah.
You know, not making room to say, wait a minute, let's give Will a chance. Let's let him play. Maybe this guy's got skills. And you may bring a different game, but you got game.
Yeah. Yeah, it's got to be tough. I mean, I grew up with children's books, and I can't recall all of them, but I'm pretty sure that almost all of them, if not all of them, mostly represented Caucasian kids. And I never thought about it. I never thought about, I mean, we're very, I think individually, especially when we're kids, we're mostly fairly selfish. I mean, and self-interested, right? I don't care about what the other guy feels like. I mean, kids have to be taught how to care, right?
I think it's in our nature not to care. I think it's in our nature self-preservation.
That's what I mean. Right.
So when you see you, well, that's good. That's uplifting to you. So why would you care if it's downtrodden to another person? Now, I'm not saying, I want to be clear on this. I'm not saying that people are purposefully doing this. I don't think that there's a conspiracy and people are like, hey, you know, let's keep the black kids down. I don't think that at all. I just think that there's a lack of empathy, not sympathy, but empathy. So
I would totally agree with you on that. And I think that's what's good about what's going on right now, is that we are having more conversations about race. And I think our kids that are growing up today have a much greater understanding than we did growing up. I mean, I had a few experiences as a kid. I mean, I grew up just north of Washington, D.C., and I grew up at a time when we had integration in the schools, so I did have a lot of friends that came from different ethnic backgrounds. And I remember one, and I think I told you this in one time when we were talking, but we were driving home one day, and we never got to go to this swimming pool that was down the street. I mean, it was 2 blocks from our house, and in the summer when it was hot, we you could see. I mean, just it was like looked like the funnest pool there was in the world, and we never got to go swimming. And we kept asking our parents, like, how come we can't go there? And they would make these little excuses and stuff. And finally, one day, my dad just said, look, they don't allow black people in there. And so we've chosen not to be a member of that pool.
Are you old enough to have experienced that? Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Jeez.
And I couldn't believe it. And I had all these questions like, why wouldn't they let black people in there? Like, there's got to be some really good reason. In my I was probably 5 or maybe 6 or 7, somewhere in that range. And I was like, the world I know makes sense pretty much. So there has to be a good reason for that I just don't know. And they couldn't give me a good they were like, well, some people just have decided to hate other people because of their skin color. And I was like, well, that's really stupid, And then I didn't want to go to that pool. And every time we drive by, I just couldn't believe that all those people in there didn't care. So I mean, I grew up with really good upbringing with really good family who I feel were very balanced. There's that's going to get off the topic, but anyway.
Well, let me drop this on you. You make a good point, and I want to tie on to the point. So, because your parents gave you a wider perspective, it makes your life better. Would you agree with that? As far as okay, so now that we're talking about the changing guard of the future and what the world's going to look like, when we don't do this for our children, when we don't go and get them diversified books or stories that include other groups of people, we actually create a more challenging world for them, because now they have to learn this as adults once they've accepted false notions or fake ideas or lies or racism or whatever it is. Now they have to unlearn and relearn a brand new concept. And we all know that's a lot harder to do than it is to introduce them to it as kids. Like, hey, guess what? There are people who don't look like you, and that's okay. They're Asians, they're Mexicans, they're whites, they're blacks, or whatever, right? We do them a service. We're helping them by doing that. And when we don't do it, we're doing them a disservice.
Well, yeah, because kids come into this world and they're definitely not racist. So we make them into racists or not. And I think that's what you're talking about. We can help them to stay the way they were born by exposing them to all that the world has to offer. Okay. Next question. What if race isn't written into the story? Do you think we should try to include it anyway as an illustrator? Is that our responsibility to try to push the boundaries a little bit, maybe to introduce that in and see what the art director or the editor says?
Good question. Now check this out. I would say not necessarily, but if we're artists, we like color, right?
Yeah.
So now watch, we're gonna go down a path. As an artist, the idea is to bring in as many colors that work together well as possible, right? Because you get balance, you get excitement, you get fluidity, you help tell a story. As artists, we naturally know to do that with color. So to not do that would be going against what we would consider successful art. So let's say that I have 2 characters, and the 2 characters are boy and girl, and they happen to be white. That's cool, no problem with that. But if you add dark little chocolate characters in the background, guess what happens? It pops the white characters out. Is that not true? So naturally, if we're being good artists and we're being honest with ourselves, that helps us more than that hurts us. So I don't necessarily think that you go and start arguing with the publisher and say, I think there should be more black people in there. I think you're saying, look, visually, this is more attractive. Guess what? By the way, the world is more attractive, diverse than it is just everything being the same color. That's a reality. We all agree with that. Like, I mean, for the most part, there's some Nazis out here who would totally disagree with me. But I mean, overall, we think America's great because it's the melting pot and we have diversity. Well, visually, we think that's beautiful. So why wouldn't we do it in our books?
Yep. Good point. One of the things that I have tried to do, and I feel like I've done successfully. When I get asked to do children's books, like I said earlier on, most of them have been with animals, or they've been a specific story where I couldn't introduce race. But I've done a lot of work for textbooks where I have just assumed. Usually, I found that the art director will ask, they'll put a note like, please make sure that you add ethnic diversity throughout the book. But sometimes they don't, and I'll just do that anyway. And it usually in the past has always kind of passed through, like almost like it was expected, which I think is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been told to take ethnicities out of a textbook story. So I think that's a good thing. I think that's a positive thing.
Now, on the reverse of that, I have been not
have
for
you really?
textbooks, but for video games. There's a company that should be. I won't mention the company. Oh yeah, I've gotten called on. I've gotten called out on that before. Like, why do you have so many black people in this?
And I would say because I'm black, and that's what I'm.
Well, no, I didn't say that. I just said I don't know. I didn't notice that I put. I mean, I didn't know there was a quota.
Right.
And you have to think about this. So you've seen Moana, right? I think it's Moana.
You know what? I haven't seen it, but my son saw it and said it was really good. And I have this list of movies I got to see, and that's one of them.
Great story, great movie. Culture. That's right. But you got to understand. So in 2016, you can show Polynesian features, and it's appreciated. You couldn't do that 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. People would be like, "Oh, that's unattractive." Now it's, and you're watching this girl. She's got this thick nose and these thick lips, and she's just as cute as anybody else in Disney or anything else. And you go, "Wow, that was refreshing." You don't walk out feeling like, "Oh, they're." No, it's like, that was refreshing. It's nice to see another story told. And by the way, to hear the Polynesian or the island people, their story being told, that was really cool too. It's like, whoa, here's some folklore I never heard. And it's the same thing I was saying earlier. As a creative, I like diversity. I like the fact that their stories. I don't know. I know everything about Zeus and all of those guys. Great. Congratulations. Right? Hercules, Hermes, all of these. I get that, right? To find out, oh yeah, they have about 20,000 gods, and we've never talked about them. What? There's this guy who's got this big hook, and he can turn into any animal. What? This is nice. And the reality is that we've been robbed of that, and we're given the same cookie cutter stories because they were easy to do, and they looked like one group of people.
Right.
We should be, as consumers, we should be disappointed and saying, that sucks. I don't know. My perspective. I could be wrong.
No, I agree.
What do I know?
What do you know?
What I know?
Well, here's a follow-up question to that one, which it would be something like,
hey, Will, I talk a lot, bro. Tell me to shut up if I'm giving too many allegories and examples.
Not at all. I love, and by the way, I've had a lot of people on this channel say, can't you condense these videos to 5 minutes and just deliver the message? And I'm like, that's not what I do. I like to ramble, and I like to listen to rambling podcasts. So, like the idea is someone's on the train. I've had a lot of people say, don't make them shorter, keep them long, because I have an hour-long train ride, or I listen to them while I'm drawing. A lot of people are drawing right now. Mm-hmm. And so we want to cover as much as we can on this.
You guys, you heard that. Will Terry just gave me permission to talk. So don't get mad at me in the comments. You say, Will, you're such a jerk. Don't let that guy talk that much next time. Will said I could talk. Huh? Will Terry. If you're a Terrian, you should be happy.
Okay, so here's a follow-up. So we're talking about different races and genders in books, like should you introduce them? But what I always, and I've talked about this before, what I find is the most difficult thing is to figure out who to make what race, because if you've got a group of kids and they're doing an activity, if they're all doing something good and there's no antagonist or any, if there's no villain, then it's easy. But as soon as you have a situation where somebody might be doing something stupid, or somebody might be doing something bad or naughty, somebody might be doing something lazy, you cannot make that person an ethnic person.
I think you can, and here's how. So I'm going to challenge that idea. You do that by making sure that your ideas of your characters are diverse. So look, if in this book the really dark guy is bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then in the next book, the really dark guy, or the next chapter, or the next part, he's the good guy, right?
Are you saying in the same book or in a different book?
In the same book, different book, it doesn't matter. Whenever you can attack or deal with it, you deal with it, right? So if the character who's written for whatever reason happen to be, let's say he's Mexican, he's Hispanic. When I say Mexican, I mean Hispanic. I'm terrible at being politically correct. All right. So let me say he's Hispanic, right? And you make him a darker hue. And he happens to be the villain, and he's got the black hat and the cowboy guns, right? Then in the next book, you don't do that. Or if you have the option in that book of making the girl the heroine or whatever, if you can make her the same color, but the guy who kills the kid with the black hat, and we're talking about children's books, but people die in my world. Okay, so he happens to be white, then the girl can then be the same as the guy in black, the Hispanic character, right? There are opportunities to solve that problem. I don't think that, oh no, every black kid in a book has to be, that's ridiculous. I almost said another, geez, I almost had to stop the podcast. That's ridiculous. I like fair. I just want fairness. I just want to see.
And I think that would be fair, but I don't think you would get that through. I don't think that you would. I think on the one book, it would be looked at on merit by itself.
Fair enough. And so I would say consistency. So when people look back at your work, they say, oh, no, but look at what he does here. This is how he does it. He tries to bring colors into his work. So the first book, you might get criticized. The second book, oh, wait a minute. Now you have a comparison. The third book, he's consistent. The fourth book, this is what he does, right? So it's all in being genuine in what you do and being consistent. You know, some problems you can't solve in one book. You just can't. You know, it's like the problem with women in television. All right, so now to address the problem of women always having these weaker roles, now all of a sudden every time you turn on TV, there's some 5'4" girl who weighs 119 pounds knocking out some grown men in the military, right? So Blind Spot, all of those
Was
NBC
that the one
shows.
with, what's her name? Blind Spot. I can't remember. She's an MMA fighter, right? Is that right?
Oh, you're thinking about Gina Carano?
What was the movie she was in?
She was in she was in Deadpool, and she was in something else. But Blind Spot is like this NBC television show.
Okay.
This girl with this tattoo who wakes up and doesn't know who she is, but she's got like all of this hand-to-hand skill. And so that's what the show is about. But you see a lot of these shows on television. Quantico, even in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., all of a sudden, you know, these little bitty women are just knocking people out. Well, what they're trying to do is compensate for what they feel was the lack of strong female models. All right, they're overdoing it, but we get the point.
Right.
They're just trying to look for balance. And so you go, it's annoying, I get it, but it's fair. I get it. I see what they're doing. They're just trying to bring balance to the force. So as a man, it's annoying, but I don't care. It's all right. No big deal. The world is changing.
You're not annoyed with the idea of a woman beating up a man. You're annoyed with
unrealistic.
If it's too unrealistic, if it goes too far,
unrealistic, right?
The size differences too. Yeah.
And we can bring up the Ronda Rousey because she beat an MMA male fighter and have that conversation some other time. And the answer just to everybody's been, no, absolutely not. That's ridiculous. No, she cannot beat Floyd Mayweather. That is the most ridiculous argument. I cannot believe people with brains were actually saying that she can beat up Floyd Mayweather. It's ridiculous.
Okay, so I have to speak to the camera right now. This is the part where I have to sidebar. Tyrus and I have this guilty pleasure. And we know that we're speaking to a lot of artists right now, but we are actually a couple of artists that actually like to watch MMA. Will you apologize for that?
I do not apologize for anything. Will is apologizing.
It's a guilty pleasure, but yeah, you're right. Like the Ronda Rousey thing. Is anybody better at judo than she was? But as far as like boxing, no, she was never a boxer. So she's not going to beat up a boxer, especially a male boxer. Anyway.
That was the point. But we get it. I think everybody understands. Everybody understands that now because she got knocked out by a boxer who was a female, and it was a pretty bad knockout. So anyway, all right. So yeah, the point I was making was that I think we see it now in television where they're going the other way to say, hey, let's show diversity. Let's show side. And so I think it's okay to do that. So Will, if you wanted to take that on, I think you could take it on in one book. You may not be successful there. People may not understand, or they may have a problem. But in the next book, you go, oh, he's consistent. He's trying to show color.
But personally, I would never do that. I would never, and I wouldn't. Here's why. I would self-censor myself, because in the climate that we're in, I would say no editor is going to allow me to make the stupid person, the whatever, all the list that I gave, right, of the kid that is doing something nefarious, a dark skinned person. I would make him a white skinned person because that's okay right now.
Yeah, and I don't like that.
I don't like that either, but
I don't like
it's
that.
what we deal with. And the thing is, I would self-censor because I would say it wouldn't get passed. I would also feel guilty for making that person dark skinned.
No, why would you feel guilty? Tell me that.
Because I would say, you know what? Because I do feel like white people have always had it better in this country, and it would not hurt my feelings to see a white person doing something bad, because white people do bad things. Black people do bad things. Asian people do bad things.
I think we have to work toward a balance. We have to work toward a balance where if the story calls for this kid to be bad or whatever, that's okay. That's okay. And if the next book it's reversed, all I'm saying is that as an artist, Will, you don't always want to say anytime you're drawing a person of color that they're the bad guy. That's what we don't want.
Right.
But if you're showing diversity and you're trying to create characters and you're trying to tell a story, then why can't that guy? Why can't he be bad? And you're saying, okay.
In my perfect world, it wouldn't even be something that crossed my mind.
Fair enough.
Do you know what I mean? Like I would just start assigning ethnicities randomly, and it would always work out to a balance. In my perfect world, we wouldn't think about race like we do. But because we do, and because of the history that we have, I think it's a reality, and I think most illustrators are probably the same. I think it's also a reason why we have, like we talked about earlier on, we have certain stories that kind of keep repeating, these safer things to deal with. I think purposely a lot of publishers avoid doing trade books, I would say, more than anything, because in textbooks you have these nondescript stories that they're teaching lessons. There might be a reading book, and it's just a group of kids interacting and stuff, and so it's less of a story to put it blunt. It's more situational, and those are the situations where I find the publishers are looking for a mix of race. And a lot of times, like I mentioned before, they'll say, they'll give me notes, and they'll say, this is a African-American kid, this one's an Asian, this one's white. And luckily, and I don't mind that. I'm like, okay, well, they've already done the thinking. This is for them, this is their thing. And I have felt a little weird when it is always the white kid, because I'm like, they're playing the game too. You know what I mean? Like they've already thought, but I'm thinking, would I have changed it? No, I would have done the same thing.
And at the end of the day, I think we have to take it case by case and be cautious. But guess who's going to lead the way? Artists. Artists are going to lead the way. We're responsible for diversity. We're responsible for pushback. We're responsible to tell a even story. That's our job. Now, you asked me a question earlier. It's like, oh, did you have any books with characters that look like you? Yes. Oh my gosh, if I read one more Martin Luther King and me book, I'm going to kill everybody. Oh my gosh, like how many books can you make for a kid about, like, he was the only black person who ever lived in the history of the world. So every book was about Martin Luther King. Yeah. So I just had a flashback, and I just wanted to share that with everybody.
Are you saying that when you were growing up, you had these books, and that was the only time that you saw ethnicity, was when it was more dealing with a historical?
That was literally the only time I saw books that dealt with characters and race and history. It was always, okay, we're telling a story about civil rights, or we're telling an all-black story with a kid who lived in an all-black town in Mississippi or something. It was always like that stuff, as opposed to, can you tell me just a regular story that happens to have kids who play together, and then some of the kids are black, some of the kids are... We didn't get much of that, if any. But you had Black History Month. Oh, by the way, this is Black History Month. It's funny we're talking about this. Did you set that up, Will? You're a genius, dude. So no, we just always have these like Black History Month. You get like these civil history books about civil rights, racism, slavery, um, Harriet Tubman, you know, like all of these stories. Yeah, you get a lot of you get the Black books there, but like, well, how come there couldn't be a little Black girl who played Little Red Riding Hood in a inner city environment kind of thing?
Right,
Like,
right.
I think that works, but you never saw anything like that. And maybe it wouldn't work. I'm just off the top of my head saying, hey, why not something like that? You know, I had a forest preserve. Why couldn't a wolf live there in a house and kidnap little girls and put them in a pot? I don't know. It's possible. You know, like why couldn't witches be of African descent? In actuality, if you're talking about witches and you're talking about sorcery and things like that, that would make more sense anyway. Maybe. So I think there's a lot of room to tell those stories. I think they make sense. If you've ever been to New Orleans and you know the history of voodoo,
Oh yeah.
look at this. There's a lot of stories to be told there.
Does that come from? It comes from Haiti, right?
It doesn't. I don't think it originated in Haiti, but Haiti had a lot to do with it. I think there was a lot of witchcraft and things like that, and voodoo and all of that stuff practiced there. And so a lot of it came to New Orleans, came to the States through there. And it's still practiced today. Like if you go to New Orleans right now, you know, they still practice voodoo in Haiti. They really practice voodoo in Haiti. And those stories are being told. There's a character that you'll see often. It's a guy. He's like a warlock or whatever. He's got this hat. He's got a skull on his face. He's got a cane. There's a reason why you see him over and over again. There's a really cool story attached to him. So, and Disney and the Frog, they tackled it a little bit. They brought a little bit of that story out and they told that story. And I thought that was good. I thought it was a start. I didn't think it was the end. But back, you know, the diversity in books, yeah, it wasn't much, man. It was just a whole bunch of Martin Luther King books. My goodness. And I love the Martin Luther King story, but you know, you're like 7 years old and you've heard the same story 200 times, you know, and 50 different books. So it's old.
So here, so do you think it's possible to get the mix right? Like, can you represent everyone in a book? Yeah, you know, is there a way to make it so that no one feels left out? And I think
no,
that's
impossible. That's impossible.
Right.
It's not possible. And I don't even think it should be the goal. But I do think diversity in the long run should be the goal. I think that maybe in this book we don't achieve what you need or what you're looking for. But in the next book I might, or in the third book I might, you know, because look, if I make all the characters my complexion, right? Well, someone who's darker than me will say, well, what about me? Okay, so I make the next book. And then someone later said, well, I feel like you're excluding me. There is no way to achieve this in one book. What we want to do is give options and variety so that kids feel like, oh, I'm in this book. Maybe the next two they aren't in.
I would assume that a Black kid or an Asian kid or an Indian kid or a Hispanic kid, even if the skin tone is off a little bit, they're still going to feel like that could be them. Whereas if everything is Caucasian, they're not. They're definitely not. They're not going to feel included. They're going to feel like an outsider.
Yeah. And I think, listen, that's what happens now. And I think it's affected our society. I think there's a natural disconnect for both parties. So let's talk about this really briefly. And it's not really a race issue as much as it is an economic issue or decisions being made based on what people are used to. So when white kids only see white kids in their books, then they're not forced to grow, which we touched on a little bit. But when Black kids only see white kids in their book, then there's a natural resentment that happens. I mean, let's be honest, you would be resentful too.
Absolutely.
All right. And so now we both grow up, both kids grow up, and instead of growing up together like this, they grow up like this. And then all of a sudden we're repeating the same cycle of racism, the same cycle of riots, violence against one another, when in reality is we know we're all human beings. So how do, you said it earlier, kids are not born racist, but what we're doing is we put them in the same system and we're still producing racism. That's why we keep having racism. We're taking the same systems and we're trying to raise our kids and hoping that they don't have a world full of racism. But guess what? It's 2017 and we're still dealing with racism.
Yeah.
Well, we're still using the same systems. And I'm saying, look, we're smart enough to do something different now. You know, we're smart enough to say, hey, let's do it differently. So let's do it differently.
You know, the more you get to know people, various people, and the more you learn. And I'll give you an example. When I was teaching school in California, even though I grew up in a very ethnically diverse area, my specific neighborhood that I grew up was mostly Caucasian, but around me there were lots of pockets. And like I said, at school it was very diverse. But I went and taught high school art in California for a couple of years when we were living out there in the Fresno area, outside of Fresno, in a very little small town. And it was, from what I understand, the town was about 50% Hispanic and 50% Caucasian. And it was kind of a culture shock for me because I had never been around that many Hispanic people. And when I got my which I love the Hispanic culture. There's so many things about it that is just so appealing. And when I got in
Tacos,
there,
tacos.
oh, I love. I mean,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, the food
Oh,
obviously, but
oh.
also I got to know a lot of my students on a personal level. In fact, I'm still Facebook friends with quite a few of them. And interestingly enough, in the class, I'm not friends with any of the white kids. I'm only friends. The friendships have lasted with the Hispanic kids. And one day I was in there teaching, and I didn't know. I stepped into this situation. And I didn't know anything. And actually, I was freelancing. I was doing freelance illustration. This was about 10 years ago. And my wife was teaching school at the middle school, and she came home and said, "Hey, they're looking for somebody to take over this class at the high school." And it's a long story. And I don't want to get into it, but the teacher got fired, and they gave me a computer lab and said, "Will you teach Photoshop and teach the kids how to draw and stuff like that?" And so I came in there and did that, and it was fun. And I did that part time. But when I went in there, I'm treating everybody the same, and which I thought was the right thing to do. And then after class, these two Hispanic kids stayed after class one day. Have I told you this story?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So they stayed after class one day and they said, first they thought I was mafia.
What?
They thought I was in the witness relocation program because nobody ever moves to that town.
Fair enough.
So like the reason we moved there was because my sister-in-law was living there and my wife wanted to live somewhere else other than Utah where she grew up. And so she wanted to experience more and wanted our kids to experience more. So we just moved there because she could teach there and they paid her more there. And I could move anywhere because I was freelance. So that's how we ended up there. And so the kids, at first, before these kids came up to me, they're like, "What are you doing here?" Like they kept asking me all these questions, like, "Why are you, why are you here?" And then they related like 2 or 3 months later, they're like, "Are you in the witness relocation program?" I'm like, "What?" And
As
they were
if you would
serious.
tell them. As if you
Yeah,
would
it's
tell them,
like I
like,
would
yes,
tell them. They're like,
yes, I am. How'd you know?
"Well, where are you from?" And I go, "Well, I grew up back east." And they're like, "Uh-huh." and and anyway, they're like, and they had never met a children's book illustrator, so I think that was one of the things. They were like, "What a stupid cover that is," like I'm like, "I'm a children's book illustrator," and they're like, "No, come on." Anyway, these two kids come up to me and they say, "We want to help you out." And I said, "Oh, okay, what's going on?" And they go, "Well, you have 3 types of Hispanic kids in the class, and you are treating us all the same, which you should do, but you also need to know that we're all different, and knowing how we're different is going to help you get along through this." So they said, "Number one, you have us, and these two guys. One's name was James, and I'm still friends with him on Facebook. He's a really fun character, and I can't remember. I think Javier was the other one, and so they said, we don't speak Spanish, you know, like you treat us. You think that we can tell you think we speak
Oh,
Spanish."
tell me you weren't mouthing words to them.
No, 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 no. I'm not that stupid. But for some reason, they thought, and they also said they said like we grew up here. Our parents grew up here, and it was my grandparents that came from Mexico. So my parents, they speak a little bit of Spanish. We don't speak any.
Okay.
So you got, and they named the people in the class that are in that group. And then they said, the second group are the people whose parents immigrated here, and the parents don't speak any English, and the kids grew up here, but they're trying not to be Hispanic. Like they don't want to be, well, they don't want to be Hispanic the old way. They want to be more hip, and they're working really hard to not be like the migrant workers, which is the third group, because we had a lot of migrant workers in our class. And he said, there's this hierarchy. It's racist and it's stupid, but it's going on in your class. And there's certain kids who don't get along. And so when, there could be a fight if you don't understand who you're dealing with, because the middle group, they don't like the migrants because they're afraid that they will be lumped in with that group and they feel like they're better than them.
I get what you're saying.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so they wanted me to know that so that I could prevent any potential problems and things like that.
So, now this is a good point. Let me show you just how human we all are. Watch what you just said. Seems like a very isolated race-based situation. Maybe not to you at this point, but to someone else. I go, oh, okay, that's a cultural or race-based problem. No, really, every group of people does that. So let's go to white people. If you're rich and you're white, what people would call a secondary group is white trash. I hate that term, but just so everybody understands what I'm saying. So the rich kids don't want to normally be associated with the poor white kids, and the poor white kids don't normally want to be associated with the rich white kids. Okay, so let's go to black culture. Same thing. They're educated black, so you say middle class black, and I may not be using the politically correct terms, but I think everybody will understand what I'm saying, versus someone who's poor.
Right.
Or if you come from a family that's well off, or your mom and dad are working and you have two incomes, versus a kid who lives with a single mom and he never sees his mom because she's always working. Normally what happens is those two they consider each other to be two different classes, etc. So it happens in every group based on different reasons. But what we do is look at it and go, oh, that's a Hispanic problem, or oh, that's a black problem, or a white problem. No, it's just people having problems. Right. And we have to stop and understand, and I know you probably already realize this, but just for the audience, we have to stop and understand these are human beings who are having human problems, not black problems, not white problems, not Hispanic problems, but human problems. And when we start to look at it like that, we start to give humane solutions and say, well, okay, I get it. Now I'm going to treat this as a human issue as opposed to a Hispanic issue.
Right. That's a good point. Because, I mean, like everybody, we have this, I think in general, especially when you're a kid, you want to feel like you're better than other people. It's like innate with all of us, right? We want to feel like, well, at least I'm not that guy.
Of course. You need a ladder. You need something to step on.
Yeah. And that's because of our own insecurities and our own lack of self-esteem, and trying to get self-esteem without merit is kind of one of those things I think that is everybody's probably experienced at least one time in their life. So, yeah.
I think we're all guilty of that. We all look at people who are poor and say, I'm better than you based on my economic status. But the reality is, he's just a human being. He's got two legs. If he's a man, two balls, just like you. And that's just the reality. You may have had a better card, or you may have made better decisions, but my life isn't worth any more than his life is, or her life, or whatever. Once we start thinking like that, we solve all of these other problems we have.
Yeah.
We have empathy as opposed to sympathy. Empathy means I'm willing to make changes in my life to help you. I'm willing to be uncomfortable to help you, as opposed to sympathy, like, oh, poor you, laying on the ground with nothing to eat. Oh, on my way to work, right? That's the difference. Once we start empathizing and working with people and understanding, that changes everything. We don't even make it to the argument of illustrations and books, because empathy will solve that problem for us.
That's a really good point. Really good. Yeah, empathy. We don't have enough of that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to historical and ethnic stories. Does someone like me, some tan white guy, beige guy, do I have the right to illustrate an ethnic story that's it takes place in another culture? Do I have that right?
Of course you do. Now, here's the fight back. Of course, the answer is yes. Let's put the yes there and kill everything else. But I'm going to give you a little more conversation. The fight back to that, the resistance is, well, what about all of these ethnic illustrators who would love to tell a story that related to them, that told of their heritage, that told of where they came from. Yeah, that becomes a problem because there's very little work for in the past. Now things are certainly changing, but in the past, there's been very little work for African American illustrators or animators or whatever, right? So you get a chance to tell a story that you're excited to tell, that relates to you, that you get to solve the problem that you struggled with as a kid for your son or your daughter. And you're like, oh my gosh, please give me the chance. I'll work so hard. I'll give it my all. And then some guy like Will Terry, who's making money hand over fist, gets to tell that story. Yeah, you're going to be, come on, man, let's be real. You're going to be pissed off like this is unfair. But is it right? Should you have the right? Yes, of course.
My answer would be I would never do it. But I don't think I would ever be asked.
Well, why would you say you would never do it? Let's talk about it.
Because because of exactly what you said, I would not feel like, I would not want to take that away from someone because I don't feel the connection. I would not, and I'm a strong believer that when we illustrate and when we write stories, we do so from our own personal experience. We bring that's if you think about it, the reason that 20-something-year-olds often don't, and this is a generalization because there are obviously exceptions to the rule, but it seems to me like when you're in your teens and 20s, you have a lot harder time telling a story compelling with illustration and putting the little tiny nuances and the little tiny details that really make the viewer feel that they're getting the story visually because of the lack of experience. Now, if a kid had lots of experience, especially in one area, then I would say they would probably be able to tell the story better. But I feel like, okay, so we'll throw out an artist named Kadir Nelson, who I greatly admire.
One of my favorite artists. Yep.
I mean, he's not only asked to do these historical stories about African Americans, but he's also before he was doing those, he was one of my favorite illustrators. His skill level is so high. If you don't, and I'll link him too. I guess I'll have to go through this video and find all the links. I should be writing them down. But his skill level is so high, and like Henry's Freedom Box is one that comes to mind. I bought that book because it was so gorgeous. I don't have those stories in my family's history. I mean, the closest I come is my mom actually didn't. And I think I told you this before. My mom couldn't pass, quote unquote, pass. She went to an all black high school because back then, if you looked at all like you had any African American blood in you, you were segregated out. And she was one of those. So, and she got picked on because she wasn't black enough to be in the school either. So she was kind of in the middle, and never told the family about that. And I found that out much later in life after she already started to get Alzheimer's. It was something that she didn't feel comfortable telling us about, which I don't understand because I feel like that should have been something that we knew. And it would have been endearing. It would have been one of those stories that I would have, felt like crying with her about, that her feelings, how she felt as a kid, I would have gotten to know her a little bit better before she died. But no, I don't feel like I could relate.
Now let's tackle that really quickly. So let's flip the coin. I'm going to give you two examples to prove that you're wrong.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to prove that you're wrong. And anyone who agrees with Will, right, I'm going to show you that you're wrong. What if, Will Terry, you grew up in my neighborhood and you were my next door neighbor and we were best friends and we had some of the very same experiences? You knew the stories I knew. We were best friends. So when my dad read a story, he read your story. When we watched the movie, you watched the movie with me. And you just happened to like the same cultural things that I like. Why are you then not qualified to tell those stories? Because of the color of your skin? Well, then that's racism. And that's the very thing we're fighting about. Now, I'm going to give you another example. 1 point for Tyrus, 0 for Will Terry. I'll give you another example. Floyd Norman, who worked for Disney. He's a black guy. So how come black people can tell white stories, but white people can't tell black stories?
Well, that's a good, you make some good points, but I think the big one is you mentioned experience. You know, if I grew up, how did you put it, in, you know, hanging out with,
Growing up, you grew up with me. You were essentially my brother. You lived
right,
next
right,
door.
right,
Right, right.
right. Then I think I probably could do a better job. I mean, I had my best friend in high school. He had a black father and a white mother, and I could
Are
tell.
you? Is your statement right now that your best friend is black, Will Terry? Please
So
tell
I'm
me
not
that's
a
not.
racist, right? That's not where I was going, but thanks. No, what I was saying is I could tell a story about him. I could tell, you know what I mean? I could,
So
you know,
then the issue is not the color of your skin; it's the stories you have to tell.
right. And I could tell you stories about how he wasn't accepted in certain circles,
Okay,
and groups and stuff. But as far as, I mean, I really do believe that we tell a better story with the experiences that we've had. And I feel like when I look at Kadir's work, that he knows things that I just don't think I would know. I
but
mean,
could
I
you learn them? Could you learn them?
could learn them. Oh yeah, absolutely. But I don't think I, and to finish up that thought of why I
Hmm.
would turn it down, I
Hmm.
would just feel like, I really would feel like I don't want to take this from someone else. Now, of course, to be honest, to be perfectly honest right now,
Hmm. Hmm.
I I can afford to turn down books from time to time, and I do turn them down.
Hmm.
I'm not, you know, I'm not relying on every single project that comes into, or I'm not going to be able to pay the rent. So, to be
Right.
honest, if I was in that situation and a book came in that I didn't necessarily feel qualified to do, and it was a choice of making money or not, I probably would choose to take it. But where I sit right now, I would say no.
I understand that. I understand that, and I think that should be based on what you're comfortable doing and what you're comfortable with, as opposed to because of the color of your skin, you're unqualified. I, as a human being, would never want to tell someone they're unqualified to do something because of the color of their skin. Just like I don't want to be told I'm unqualified to tell little white girl stories because of the color or the sex that I am.
Right.
What if I have a really good story that I feel relates to little girls and I want to tell it? Well, okay, here's a perfect example. So the book that that got me started, the book that I'm most, I guess, popular for, is called Penny and the Magic Puffballs, right? I'm not a little girl. I never had my hair in pigtails, but the whole book is about that. Guess why I'm qualified to tell that story? Because I had sisters, I have daughters, I grew up in that culture, and I understand it. I understand the importance of it. And I'm helping another lady tell the story.
Right.
So if I limit you and say you're not qualified to do it, then I'm not qualified to do that.
Fair enough. Good answer.
3-0. I'll
Okay.
take that.
Three.
I'll take that.
I don't think so. Okay. Let's see. Do I want to do that one? Let's see. So, yeah, okay. Let's just touch on this. What about stereotypical cultural things like showing an Asian with glasses, a white kid with a big suburban house, a black kid with a basketball? Is that something you think we should avoid? You know what I'm saying? Like,
I do. I think it's context, man. Like if if everybody's in school and all of a sudden the black kid's just dribbling a basketball, that's weird. That's why does he have a basketball in school? Right? you
you
know,
know,
you,
I already know the answer to this.
oh,
Just
of
because
course,
I'm
of course. I'm just talking, I'm talking to you like I'm talking to the audience in this.
okay.
Will, you're smart enough to know
I
the
don't
answer
want
to
you to
this
go
question.
4-0 on me.
I'll stop keeping count. I'm just messing with you, man. Yeah, so that's just awkward and it doesn't make any sense unless you're coming from a stereotypical place where you're taking a stereotype and saying, oh, this kid should have a basketball. Well, does it make sense for the kid to have a basketball? Or if you're doing an Asian kid and you're putting glasses on them. Like I personally like to add glasses to characters whenever I can because it adds more character to them. And it simplifies the design. That kid's got the glasses, right? Okay, so
Yeah.
if that's the issue, then wonderful. That's great. But if it's because all Chinese kids do math very well, they're great at math, and they should have glasses. Once again, that's not the right answer. Uh, I think the answer is context. Whether it's girl, boy, Asian, Hispanic, you know, you have an Asian and Hispanic kid in class, and he's sitting in class with a sombrero on. What? Why do he have a sombrero?
Right.
That doesn't make any sense.
So,
So
so the follow up is it our responsibility as illustrators to break those stereotypes?
I completely, like I said earlier, yes. That is our job. This is how we contribute to the world, by saying, I'm going to show this kid is Hispanic without putting a sombrero, the cheap and easy shot on him, right? I'm going to show him with dark hair and olive skin. And, if he's a little chunky, great. If he's not, I'm going to try to bring his ethnicity into it visually, as opposed to cues. With an Asian kid, I'm going to try to do the same thing. Like, I'm going to say, okay, well, if he has almond-shaped eyes, how can I accentuate that and make that even more attractive and say, this kid is cool? That's my job. That's my job. Is not to go with the, I'm going to make his two front teeth buck. That's what they used to do, and put chopstick in his
Oh, yeah.
Then I'm not any good. If I have to do that, I'm not a good artist. I'm not a good illustrator. I'm cheap and I cheat.
So then what about, okay, so there's stereotypes of action. What about stereotypical facial features and stuff? Because this is one thing that I think a lot of illustrators get scared about is, I mean, like, let's face it, white kids, Asian kids, black kids, Hispanic kids, we don't look the same with different skin color. We definitely have different features. And as an artist, we know this. I don't know if everyone that's, not an artist knows that, but I think and that would be one thing that I'd be afraid of doing if I were doing a more historical book like Kadir Nelson. I'd be worried that I wouldn't capture, going back to that. But
two answers to that. Well, so as a black artist, like, if I was imitating a style like Kadir Nelson, I would be concerned about the same thing, right? That's an initial, like, oh, am I portraying this? Let's say that I'm going to do fuller lips. Am I doing too much, or am I showing a strong representation of that?
Right, because if you, to add on to that, for me, I try to accentuate and exaggerate certain features. And one of the things that I'd be very careful and have been very careful of is I want to make sure that I'm doing the features justice without lampooning them, without making them, without
coonish
mocking them
or silly, right? Yeah,
right.
So
right.
so the answer is just be honest. Just be honest. Look, at the end of the day, you have to be true to your style, and you may fail in your style. That's the reality, because if you're drawing, just like anything else, if you're drawing to please an invisible group of people, you will fail, because those people don't exist, and they're not going to be there to applaud when you achieve that. But if you're being honest with yourself and you say, okay, well, look, I'm not trying to offend anyone. I'm going to do my best for making an Asian kid, to make this Asian kid as attractive as possible as an Asian kid. So if I think that him having wide front teeth helps me, then I'm going to do that. I wouldn't think that, but right? If I think, okay, so his eyes are supposed to be smaller and have this shape, I'm going to do that, but I'm going to do it well. I'm not going to take the cheap shot and just go slit and put little, right? That's cheap. I'm going to say, how can I make this beautiful, attractive, and represent the character?
Well, because we're shape makers. And so every ethnicity has its own shapes and different attractions, and they're already beautiful. So you just basically have to ask yourself, how is this different, and how is it different from what I'm used to doing, and how can I accentuate that and make it even more, not even more beautiful, but more into your style, so that it fits, and those shapes are different but similar. It's tough.
Yeah, I think the answer is just to be honest. As an artist, be honest with yourself. Just be honest. Do what you do and be honest about it. If look, you're purposely saying, look, I don't want to offend anyone, but I have to be an artist. I have to create. And maybe my style just doesn't work. That may be the answer to the question. You can improve as an artist after that, but at the end of the day, all you can do is be honest and be the artist that you are.
Yeah.
And if your style offends people, then you've offended people. There's no way of getting around it in any form.
Yeah. Well, and I would add to that too, that some people are looking to be offended, and I wouldn't, if you're being honest and sincere, and you're really, I mean, there are people that make some really stupid decisions, and we've known some of those.
Yes, of course, yeah.
And we're not talking about that, but I think that you've got to, like you said, be honest and try to do you, and try to do right by the characters. you know when you're screwing it up. I think most people know when they're trying to get away with something that's not, when they're trying to basically pick a fight with their art. And we don't really see that very often.
No,
I've only seen
yeah.
that a few times, and they've been career ending.
I used to see it in the Warner Brothers cartoons, and that was in the '70s. And they look back at that and they're embarrassed by it. They're
Right,
embarrassed
right,
that they did that
right.
Picky or whatever it was, this little black Warner Brother cartoons with like really big lips, and there was a magpie and all of this.
I don't know
They're
that one.
embarrassed. Oh, they're embarrassed by it, right? And
Mm,
so it is what it is. But I had a thought, and all that it really comes back to is if you have a hatred or you are dislike, then don't do it. Don't do it for the money. But outside of that, just be honest. Then take the
yeah.
easy way out and do what you can do. And by the way, there's a really offensive character to some people, and I think it's one of the better character designs of all time. In The Incredibles, the mom.
Mm,
So the mom's got a really wide hips and a really big butt, right?
mhm.
I love that character. That's
Is that
racist.
is that offensive?
Oh, yeah, women, find it offensive. Some people go, "Oh, you're stereotype." I think that, I think that what we do allows us to be diverse in our designs, right? We can't put people in a box and say every black character, every Hispanic has to look like. No, it's like we should be allowed to take chances
Mm,
on design, and to say, "Oh, I'm gonna give this character a really big head or a really big nose."
right.
Um, and in doing that, we should try to achieve great design. Go back to Mona, whatever I say it. Uh, the beauty of it is that they were very ethnic with the design. So they
Mhm.
broke a lot of the rules where you try to go, oh, let's make this character more European. No, they did the exact opposite. They showed thick hands, thick feet, thick bodies, and it looks very, very good. So that's just great design. And I
Mhm.
think once the goal is to make great design, then we're good. We're rocking and
So
rolling.
you're saying they were on that show, they were, because I haven't seen it, but I've only seen
Mhm.
some of the trailers and stuff, and from what I have seen, I agree, it seems like it's ethnically honest
Right.
to the culture.
And that's what
Right.
makes it special. That's what makes it. I mean, when you look at it and you see the curly hair and you see like even the Rock's character, the male character, you hear the voice, and it feels good. It feels cultural and it feels on purpose, and it's refreshing and enjoyable. And to anyone out there who hasn't seen it, just take a look. And if you have seen it, now watch it through this conversation, and you'll go, "Oh wow, yeah, this is different. This is different," and we actually like it.
Yeah.
We like the difference in it. It's not a Disney princess traditional look. It's something else.
Yeah. That's good. Good points.
Mm.
Well, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you wanted to get in there?
Now I got in. I had my little notes, and so my little
Oh,
retorts.
good.
Yeah, I
Oh,
was
you had
doing it as
notes.
we went along. Yeah, yeah. I came ready. Will, I did my homework. All right, I did my homework. Um, that's it, man. That's it for me.
That was
But
good.
I enjoyed the conversation, and I would say, in the end, reminding all the artists out there, the designers, the writers, just be honest. You can't go wrong with being true. Research and do your very best to be a great designer.
And one, you know what, I might add one thing that I've learned along the way is that if you're telling stories, the most important thing is that you tell a compelling story. And I think that when you like, because some people right now, there's so many different um, fringe and areas for niches, like we talked about before, like, you know I mean, when we talk about diversity, we're talking about there are people in wheelchairs, there are blind people, deaf people, tall
Mhm,
people, short people, fat
mhm,
people.
mhm,
um Genders is a thing now, and more than we've ever talked about before. Obviously race. And so you can't you can't include everybody in every book, but as long as you're being honest and also having, and we keep saying being honest, but when you're trying to tell a really good story, that's what's going to sell. If you want to be successful, when you have an agenda to teach a point, from everything that I've learned, everything that I've experienced, you're going to be more successful if the story comes first and it happens to teach that principle or that concept or happens to include that subgroup, versus I would like to create a children's book. And primarily we're talking about children's books because we're children's book illustrators.
mhm.
But if you set out to teach the world or preach to the world the certain lesson that you want taught, those books tend to not do as well as books that just have a really good, compelling story that happen to teach that thing. And that's a kind of a magical thing. And a lot of authors will say, I didn't, they'll teach a principle like honesty or something. They're like, well, actually I never really set out to teach honesty, but that happened. Yeah, I guess that happened to be the overall theme of the story. That's what I'm talking about. Those tend to be better.
I agree with you. And also, when we try to teach a lesson, that lesson may change or it may not be relative in the future. Things change.
Yeah.
The world changes. So you can outdate yourself by doing something like that, as opposed to saying, I'm going to tell a good story, and this is a part of the story.
That will stand the test of time, because a good story does stand the test of time.
Yeah.
That's a great note to end on. Do you have anything you're pitching, any place where people can find you, stuff like that?
Yes. Okay. So what am I pitching right now? Nothing. All right, but you can find me on Instagram under TGoSketch, TGoSketch, and follow me. I'll follow you back. I'll talk to you. You can yell at me and tell me how I'm wrong or how I'm right. And you can, if you want, you can give me your points. How many you got it, Will, and how many you have me, to see what really won. I'm just joking about that. But no, please, follow me, talk to me. I love to have a conversation about this, and I may learn something. I'm always looking to learn something new. So Instagram and Facebook under TGoSketch or Tyrus Goshay, TyrusGoshay.
And I'll put links to those in the description as well. And as always, if you can't find the description, then you have no business on YouTube, because
it's 2017.
Right below the video. Thank you so much for doing this. This was awesome.
It's good. It's fun, man.
Love talking to you. And we got to watch our next fight together.
Anytime. Just let me know.
All right, guys. As always, go out there and make great art. And we'll see you on the next video.